Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be baking in Substance Painter, and we're going to be importing the high poly and low poly clock to demonstrate this. So let's get into this. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate on this clock here that I made for another project I'm working on, because it's a little bit more intricate and there's a lot of space in between, and it requires kind of a little bit more finesse in baking it. The colors on these, on the high poly model here, when I work, I name all my parts HP for high poly, and depending on what is happening with that part, it has the modifiers on them, and they will determine kind of the shading or bevel. So if I turn these off in this example, you can see how this hard edge here looks like this. And when I turn on the modifiers, it's got this clean edge here. And the edge in this case has a mean increase of 50 to create that feel. So if I set this to 0, now it's quite round. If I set it to 1, it's very hard and sharp. And at 0.5, it's giving me kind of my desired rounding here. And so this information will be transferred onto the low poly. What I've done is the high poly and the low poly, I've set keyframes down here, and I've just pushed out parts that will need more space for the baking. And you can see how everything's animated out. And the reason I'm doing this is because the low res also needs to be moved at the same position. However, there are more pieces missing on the low res, because in my final export, for example, this piece will just be mirrored. Same with this bell. So there's a bunch of pieces missing that will be reassembled in the final render. So I'm only taking what I absolutely need in my render here in order to create the bake. Now I should have moved this part over as well, but I didn't, but because I'm going to mirror this in 4 different places. And the reason why I'm doing that is it just saves texture space on my map. If I keep every piece and I UV them, then those extra parts are taking up UV space, and then I'm losing information for these other pieces. So what I like to do is, this is my low poly, everything is called low poly. All of the modifiers are turned off and they are animated out along with the high res. It's important that the high res and the low res are in the same place when you're baking, otherwise the information won't transfer over. And I export these two separately. So the low poly, I'll select this, select everything, file, export. I do OBJs when I'm doing my exports into Substance Painter, and then I just name it whatever, and clock, and it'll be called low poly, LP. I'm going to cancel that because I already have it. Same with this one. I'm going to select everything, export that, file, export OBJ, and this one will be called high poly. And the reason why I have these materials on it is when I do an ID map and I'm baking, the ID map will be used later to assign materials to it. This one's purple, this one's blue. And so it just will make it easier later on. So each one of these has a ID map material. You could do this with vector paint, or there's other ways you could do it. Okay, so that's it for setting up the HP and low poly. Just wanted to clarify that. In my map that I did for the vault, it wasn't done exactly the same way as this because it's more flat and it doesn't have all these components in there. And anything in the map that was damaged, which you'll see later in terms of the baking, would need to be either cleaned up, or if it's not going to be a problem, you just leave it. Okay, so we're going to set up our Substance Painter bake, and here's the Apothecary Clock low poly. Look at the difference in file size between the two. Okay, so we're going to take this one. So we're going to go File, New. Hello. Okay. In this case, we're working for the engine, so we want DirectX. We're going to set this to 4,900 or 4,096. I always like to work larger. You can always bake the maps down or export the maps lower. So just something to keep in mind if you're working. I tend to work as large as I can, and then when I'm bringing things in, I'll make them smaller. So let's go to the Apothecary where I'm building this case. OBJ clock low poly. There it is. Okay. Everything looks good. Bring it in. So we got our clock here, and you can see how the edges are quite harsh, not looking great. Still fine, but let's make it better. So we want to go over to the texture settings here, and we can see the bake maps. Click this. I'm going to set this to 4K, and dilation width, I always just crank this all the way. I don't know, just a habit. We want to select the HP clock because this is the one that we're going to be using to bake down. I set my anti-aliasing samples all the way up. I change this to LP just because that's how I work. HP. Okay. So this is looking for the naming convention on all the parts that we had. We don't need thickness. And this we may have to adjust later. This is kind of like the mesh around the parts that it's pinging, I guess you would say. The material ID is going to be off of a material color because we set that on the HP, the high poly. So all those different colors. Ambient occlusion, I usually crank this up all the way, and I crank this up all the way. I haven't played with these much, but these results tend to work for me. All right, everything looks like it's set up, and let's bake. Okay, so the bake is finished, and let's check it out. This piece here is going to look a little weird because it's a single ribbon, but it's fine. And these little squares are okay because it's coming from the high res, and that's okay because when this piece is merged around, it's going to be good. So beautiful edge, nice bevel bake transfer on here. So it's looking pretty good. Could have moved this bell out a little bit more, so that's not happening there. You can see this little dark circle there. So same with this here, could have moved this out, or I can tighten up the map. But all in all, it's not too bad. If you have any odd things like this that you want to clean up, let's see, go to the normal map. So you could take this into Photoshop or something and find that in your map and clean that up. That's the bell. Where's the bell? Ah, here we go. So there's the top of the bell. So we could clean up this projection here, or we could change the animation and just move it up so the bell is clean. Yeah, so this is basically how your maps are going to look, nice and clean. When you move things out, they have a, like this one doesn't have the stuff on there, and you can put your materials in nicely. I'll just show you the ID map too, so you can get an idea of why we did this. Here's the ID map. So these are all the materials here. Let's say we grab this guy, and let's grab this concrete and whatever, some wood or something. So we've got 3 different materials here, and now we can use the ID map to quickly assign those. So if I go out of the ID, back to the material, so we've got this first one here, which is applied to everything. Well, let's add a black mask. Let's add a color selection to that. Grab the picker, and let's say we only want that on the yellow. Okay, now because these other, oh, I did this on the wood. Okay, let's pick this black one and let's turn this off. So, and we want to remove the yellow. So now the black material has that wood texture. And let's go to concrete, let's add a black mask, and let's do the same thing. Color correction, color picker, set it to blue. That's now concrete. And then the aluminum, it's over top of everything, so it's still being applied to everything. We add a black mask to that, and let's pick the yellow. So it's just a very quick way of assigning your materials to your assets. And that's why you do the ID, just to save you time. You could go in and do other things too, like if you wanted to add a layer, let's make this red for the sake of demonstration here. Let's add a black mask, let's add a paint fill, and we could go to this side and select this poly fill, and we can change it to mesh and just select your mesh that you want. You do that too. Sometimes it gets a little finicky though, and you don't want to do that. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. If you don't make an ID map, it's not the end of the world. It just may be a bit more time consuming for you. And then you switch out of that and you can paint away. So, okay, so that's the demonstration for baking, and this is part of my workflow. This is what I do. Okay, so let's get moving on to the next thing. So here's the follow vault door, and I'm just checking out the bake. It's the same method that I used for the clock, and you can see there's some errors there on the buttons. That's going to be needed to be fixed. So I'm just investigating the bake to see what needs to be addressed before I go into texturing. So you can see all these little kind of nicks and stuff. So we could fix this in After Effects, or sorry, Photoshop, or I can move these things out and animate them like I did on the clock. Some of them, like those in there, I'm not going to fix. It's so deep and with the rust and stuff, I don't think anyone's going to notice. But some of those other ones, like the buttons and that, will need to be fixed before I go into texturing. So to finish up the video, I'm just going to show you how the glass was made. All right, thanks again for joining me on this channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have a great day.